In 96 AD, a boy named Marcus stood motionless beneath the skylight of a Roman villa. He was 13 years old, dressed in a white tunic, his dark hair slick with oil applied by household slaves. The air was filled with the scent of roasted meat and honeyed wine, though no one spoke to him. Servants rushed by, eyes downcast, preparing for something that no one had explained to him. 3 days earlier, his name had been written on papyrus and placed in a silver bowl. A quiet transaction had already begun, one he was unaware of, though he would soon feel its consequences. Marcus had been sold once before, when his father's farm collapsed under debt. His parents had chosen between starvation and slavery. But this time was different. This was not a desperate act of survival. This was calculated, organized, legal. He still kept a small wooden horse tucked into his belt, carved by his father on the night before they parted. It was the only remaining trace of who he once was. That night, it would be burned in front of him, the first ritual in erasing his past, and preparing him for a new life defined by silence, obedience, and systematic degradation. Across the Roman Empire, tens of thousands of boys shared Marcus's fate. They were not taken for field labor or military service. They were selected, trained, and sold for a very specific function, to serve as concubines for the pleasure of Rome's elite. This wasn't hidden. It was a structured, profitable, and well-documented institution that operated behind the marble columns of Roman villas and the golden curtains of aristocratic chambers. Wealthy Romans competed to acquire the most beautiful young boys, often displaying them at banquets as living ornaments. The trade was so normalized that poets wrote openly of their favorite boys. Philosophers debated the ideal age and training methods. Emperors listed preferences the way others listed horses. Marcus was sold not to a single master, but to a consortium. 3 wealthy Roman men who co-owned a private facility on the city's outskirts. It was not a household. It was an institution. A place designed to refine human exploitation into an industry. The villa where he was taken was surrounded by high walls and iron gates. Inside were manicured gardens, luxurious rooms, and quarters designed for young male slaves. Marcus was placed in a suite with fine furniture, silk curtains, and polished instruments, but the windows were barred and the doors locked from the outside. Every surface, every rule, every luxury served a purpose: to confuse the captive, to reward compliance, and to erase resistance without leaving scars. Training began immediately. Marcus was assigned tutors in music, poetry, and philosophy. He was taught to speak with eloquence, walk with elegance, and entertain with charm. But these lessons were not education. They were preparation. His value depended not only on physical beauty but on how well he could simulate delight, submission, and refinement. He was being trained to be admired and consumed. Each morning began with grooming and inspections. Each night ended in fear of being summoned. Punishments for defiance were psychological, not brutal: sensory deprivation, isolation, forced stillness. The absence of clear rules created constant anxiety. Emotional bonds were forbidden. Friendship was discouraged. Older boys were rewarded for informing on others. Resistance wasn't just punished, it was preemptively dismantled. Many of the handlers were former concubines themselves. Survivors of the same system, they had learned that obedience offered the only path to limited safety. In turn, they became the most efficient enforcers of the empire's cruel machinery. Marcus observed this transformation firsthand. The confident Greek boy who arrived shortly after him grew quiet and compliant within weeks. The defiant Germanic youth was beaten, isolated, and eventually turned into a model of submission. Over time, Marcus began to mirror the same behaviors, not out of acceptance, but as a survival mechanism. His smile became automatic. His posture perfect. His voice calm. His real self slowly disappeared beneath a persona built for performance. The clients were powerful men, senators, generals, and intellectuals whose public virtues masked private appetites. They arrived in litters adorned with silk and gold. Marcus was summoned, presented, and evaluated. Sometimes asked to recite, other times to dance, always to be examined. When his time came to serve, he was chosen by a senator known for moral speeches in the forum. During the encounter, Marcus stood silent while the men commented on his features as though speaking about a piece of sculpture. The act itself was brutal, but the psychological effect was deeper. Marcus realized his training had worked. His reactions were automatic. His resistance was buried. He had become what they wanted, a product. The facility operated with clinical precision. Boys were tracked, scheduled, and rotated like assets. Medical tools were used to alter their appearances, painful procedures done without anesthesia to meet the evolving preferences of clients. Their availability was recorded on scrolls. Each life reduced to an entry in a ledger. As Marcus aged, the conversations around him changed. His youthful features were fading. His usefulness diminishing. Discussions began about resale options, lower-tier brothels, harsher households, or castration to preserve his appeal. Some boys were sold. Others vanished. A few simply died from disease, exhaustion, or suicide. Their bodies were quietly buried. Replacements were always arriving. Marcus contracted an illness during his second year, a slow, wasting condition. He knew what it meant. He didn't fight it. As fever consumed him, he imagined hearing his father's voice again, calling his name from the hills of Gaul. He remembered sunlight, real work, and moments that belonged only to him. He died alone on a cold morning. Guards found him during routine inspection. His death was logged, inventory reduced. Replacement required. No ceremony. No name. Just a line in a book. 16 centuries later, that ledger was unearthed by archaeologists digging through the ruins of what had once been one of Rome's most exclusive concubine facilities. It was surrounded by bones of young boys, many under 16, showing signs of malnutrition, physical abuse, and post-mortem surgical alterations. The walls still bore chains. The floors, stains. In sealed rooms, scrolls revealed client lists that included senators, military heroes, and early Christian bishops. The records showed that this one facility had processed over 3,000 boys in less than a century. There were at least 200 similar centers across the Roman world. Conservative estimates put the total number of victims at over 800,000. This wasn't an anomaly. This was state-supported. Legal. Profitable. Hidden behind the facade of Roman civilization and beauty. And it didn't end with Rome. Today, more than 27 million people live in modern slavery. A quarter of them are children. The tools have changed. The faces have changed. But the system remains. Powerful people still consume the bodies of the vulnerable while society looks the other way. The Roman model of exploitation, wrapped in legality, luxury, and bureaucracy, was not buried in the ruins. It was replicated. Marcus was not a statistic. He was a boy. He once carved horses and believed in freedom. He deserved love, not profit. Dignity, not disposal. The empire that killed him is gone. But the machine it built still lives. And unless we face the past it tried to hide, it always will.